Job is incredibly obedient. He is proactively obedient to God. And yet Job is allowed by God to lose everything. He loses all of his kids. He loses all of his wealth. He loses his standing and status in his community. He loses the health of his own body. He loses everything. And then Job's friends come around and they begin asking questions. Job and his friends are trying to make sense of what's happening to Job. And the heartbeat of his friends' questions is, what'd you do, bud? Like, God doesn't blow up people's lives for funsies, Job. What did you do to earn God blowing up your life? That's their thing. They're looking at the equation. They're looking at the formula. And they're saying, this doesn't just happen to people, Job. God does this because you did something. You failed to obey. Surely you are hiding sin. And Job says, man, I know that God should reward me because I know that I'm obedient, and he hasn't. So maybe God is unjust. And then God shows up on the scene, and he doesn't answer one of their questions. Instead, God asks a question of his own. Fellas, you think I run the cosmos on an algorithm? You have no idea how complicated it is to run the entire cosmos. You think I'm using a formula? You think it's just a cosmic karma formula that good for good and bad for bad? You think that's how I'm doing it? A.W. Tozer says we have a bad habit of reducing God to manageable terms. Manageable terms meaning something I can understand, something that acts and operates like me. So if you were in charge of the cosmos, absolutely you'd use a formula. Because how can you possibly be everywhere at once? How can you possibly respond to all the different things happening in the world? You would govern using a formula, but not God. He is all powerful, all knowing, and all present, which means he is able to uniquely respond to every single person and every single situation that comes their way throughout all of human history, and is able to get into the nuance of every single situation, and his wisdom is infinite. So he does not govern using a formula, he governs through his divine and infinite wisdom, which sometimes looks like blowing your life up for Christmas, which sometimes looks like a gift you would want nothing to do with. Obedience is not a formula. We do not obey to get a set of good responses back from God. We obey because we trust him. We trust that God sees more than we do. We trust that he knows more than we do. And we trust that he is good at his job. That's why we obey, not so that we get blessed in return. And Joseph's story, Job's story, are reminders to us. The heartbeat of those stories is God does not owe you blessing for obedience, but watch this, but you can trust him because God is not reckless. God doesn't just so happen to allow things to come into your life. He does not waste pain. And so you can trust him because whatever you're going through, the unwanted gift that you are experiencing is not there by accident, even if you don't understand it. So Joseph's got his own plan, and God's got a very different plan. Let's see how they intersect. Picking it back up in verse 20. But after Joseph had considered this, divorcing Mary quietly, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. The angel shows up to Joseph in a dream and says, hey bro, she's not lying. I know it sounds crazy. Parents of teenagers in the room, you've got a 13 to 15-year-old girl that's saying, it was the Holy Spirit. And you've got a 13 to 18-year-old boy who's saying, it wasn't me. It doesn't look great, okay? It looks like a full-on disaster. You're not believing a one of them. And so rightfully so, Joseph did not believe this story that he was hearing from Mary. The angel shows up and says, she's not lying. What she said is the truth. And don't be afraid to take her as your wife. Afraid? What does Joseph have to be afraid of? Well, the opinions of other people. I mean, think about this. He has talked about this situation copiously with his parents, trying to figure out the right thing to do. And his parents were probably like, dude, do a public trial. Take the divorce public so that you can clear your name and our family's name, because we don't want to be embarrassed by all of this. He's probably talked it over with Mary's dad. Like, that was uncomfortable and awkward. And he probably said his intentions, man, I want to try to not blow her up, so I want to do this quietly, but I am going to divorce her. He's probably disappointed, but gets it. He's probably talked it over with his friends, trying to make sense of the situation, and he has come to a conclusion. I'm going to divorce her quietly. Now he's going to have to walk all that back with all of these people? That's going to get awkward. That's going to be uncomfortable. Way more awkward conversations are ahead of him. And worse of all, the community around them that's already whispering about the two of them. You know what those whispers are going to turn into. Oh, I heard that Joseph actually did try to get her pregnant. He did get her pregnant, and then he tried to divorce her to get out of it. What a sleazeball. Her dad caught him, though, and forced him to marry her. I mean, he's going to be marked by this for life, right? The chatter. And this is not deserved. He didn't do anything wrong. And he's going to lose business opportunities as a carpenter in his community, because why would you do business with that guy? He's marked by this. And though we've never been in Joseph's situation, how many times have you been in a situation where you know what God is calling you to do? You know what obedience looks like to God. And yet you know if you obey, people are going to talk. Somebody's going to say something. Like a time when you knew what your friends was doing was wrong, and you felt like you needed to stand up and say, I'm not going to participate in that. And you knew what they were going to say. Or a time when you knew something was out of bounds and wrong at work, and you felt called to speak up and say something, but you knew that in doing that, you were going to lose potential opportunities to earn more money and be promoted down the tracks. Or how about this? We're all about to get together with our extended family, and there are some of you who, man, the way that God has called you to parent your kids, you know is very different than how you were parented, or how even aunts and uncles in your family are parenting their kids. And you are going to have an opportunity to parent the way that God's called you to, and you know what grandma and grandpa are going to say. You know what aunts and uncles are going to say. And we could just keep going. The chatter starts to happen when we live obediently to God. And if we're not careful, that makes obedience really confusing to us. Because if my goal is to please the people around me, I will quickly become very concerned about obeying God. But you've got to remember this. We obey God because we trust him, and we obey God first and foremost to please him. In your notes, obey God even when people won't understand, because you live for his approval, not theirs. Obey God even when people won't understand, because you live for his approval, not theirs. See, when you start adding, man, I want to please God, but then, what are my friends going to say? What are my coworkers going to say? What are my parents going to say? And you just start going down the list, and you start adding filters and layers to obedience to God. All of a sudden it gets really confusing whether or not you should step forward in obedience. Man, you don't obey to please other people. You obey first and foremost to please God, and that makes obedience that much clearer. What is pleasing to him? That's what you step into. I'll remind you of a verse from our very first series this year in 1 Thessalonians. Look at what Paul says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4. On the contrary, we speak as those approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, we are not trying to please people, but God who tests our heart. Paul says the goal of the Christian life is not to please other people, but is first and foremost to please God.